In this evening's session, my three guests are going to be exploring how to sow the seeds of activism within financial institutions. Now, I say financial, but many of the things we discuss, I'm sure, are going to be universally applicable. So as we know, XR is best known for its acts of mass public disruption. But a less frequently discussed topic is the internal disruption that occurs when rebels meet face to face with the powerful individuals that they're trying to influence. So, what is internal disruption? How can we best make use of it as a campaigning tool? And is it a valid tactic for a movement like XR that's so focused on mass public civil disobedience? So, we'll be exploring these questions and more over the next hour. And my three guests are Roc Sandford from XR Catalysers, and you'll find out a bit more about what they do in a minute. Justine Huxley from St Ethelburga's Centre for Reconciliation and Peace in the City of London, and Rafela Fitzhugh, who's from XR Hammersmith and Fulham, and is running an ongoing campaign targeting the global management consultancy firm McKinsey. These speakers have a wealth of experience engaging with key decision makers in both UK government and these major private institutions. And in some cases, they've had really profound impacts through the conversations and interactions they've had, and sometimes resulted in really big changes in course for these institutions. So without further ado, I'll invite our first speaker to introduce himself and a little bit about the work that he's been doing in this space. So over to you, Roc.
Thank you, Rob. So my academic background is as a mathematical geographer, and my work was to figure out ways to model Earth systems and try and sort of understand how they're working. And that gave me an early insight of the horror that's unfolding now in these linked emergencies. I dropped out of that after a while. I felt like the models couldn't capture enough of reality to really satisfy me. And I went and lived off-grid for a while. And I started with what I call the guzzling approach, where I had a generator and I had an oil-fired range, which was heating water for baths. But over the course of years, I kind of gradually let it all go and learned that the less is more. And one is often much better off without the generator, which just goes wrong and runs out of diesel and etc. And so my journey has been one towards less and less reliance on sort of carbon, although I still have a long way to go. And although there are obviously difficulties involved, a lot of it is much better than the sort of carbon version. So it's not all bad decarbonization. It's actually like really nice. And then on the activism front, for about 30 years, I've been sort of giving quite a lot of my time to activism. And one of my focuses was salmon farming. I had a really good friend called Michael Blakenham, and together we sort of concentrated on salmon farming off the west coast of Scotland. And we experienced some serious pushback. The industry had captured the organisms of the Scottish government, like Scottish Natural Heritage and Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, and were making them, in effect, grant the consents they needed to expand the industry. And so I figured out I have to take a step back and use a scientific approach to understanding how we overcome this, and figured out nonviolent direct action was the sort of number one candidate. And so I started doing some work in trying to get scientists involved in that. Quickly discovered Roger Hallam and Rising Up Network, which was the sort of progenitor to Extinction Rebellion, and went and sat down in front of the traffic at Marble Arch with about 15 people a few years ago, and was back a year later with thousands of reinforcements. So the power of nonviolent direct action was really demonstrated to me, and it is a very powerful tool.
Justine, would you like to just introduce yourself and which organisation you're coming from, and just a little bit of background about that?
Sure, thanks, Rob. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you. I guess I'm the bit of the wild card in the mix today. I'm the kind of outsider with a slightly different perspective, but I'm really delighted to be participating. So I'm the CEO of St Ethelburga Centre, which is a centre for reconciliation and peace, and we're based in the heart of the city, in the financial district of London. And we work with three different things: with community polarisation, with the refugee crisis, and with climate breakdown. And really the overarching narrative for everything we do is one of deep adaptation. Our aim is to grow leadership capacity for times of ecological and social emergency. And our modus operandi is mainly leadership programs. We work through that, and we also work through reconciliation models. So our work is based in 4 core values. The first is to seek opportunity in crisis, and I believe we're really at a moment of opportunity in crisis right now. The second is to protect what is sacred, meaning the values that are deepest to us as human beings and the sacred space of nature. We build community across differences. This is a value, to build community across differences, so to include diverse voices in everything that we do. And lastly, to put values into action. And all of those values are actually reflected in the history of the building. And so our patron saint, St Ethelburga, actually put her values into action by working with plague victims. So we have this incredible role model for what we're going through at the moment. So we work with spirituality, and we're firmly based in an interfaith model. So my background, I have a PhD in psychology, and I belong to a Sufi community which is rooted in meditation. So I'm very interested personally in activism that brings together the inner and the outer. And I feel that that's actually really important for the deeper transformation that we need. And before coming to St Ethelburga's, I worked on the trading floor of an investment bank in the city in derivative sales. So I was there for 5 years, and it was a slightly random accident of the universe that I landed there, but it became an extended social experiment, or a kind of spiritual boot camp in how to operate in that environment, which was fundamentally against my values at the time. So I went from that role to the work at St Ethelburga's, which is actually 2 minutes around the corner. And I was hired to build relationships with the city, to make links between our piecework and what goes on in the financial district. And for the last year in particular, we've been building relationships with CEOs of small to medium-sized insurance and reinsurance and small finance boutiques, working with senior leaders, CEOs and founders within those institutions. And we're building the relationships and looking to see how we can bring the deep adaptation agenda and a restorative justice approach to those relationships. So that's me, thank you.
My name is Rafela Fitzhugh. I am a geography teacher. My history does include working in the city very briefly. But I'm also an XR activist, and I'm on today to represent our group XR Hammersmith and Fulham. What we started about 6 months ago, an action against McKinsey. McKinsey, for those of you that don't know, they are not the largest, but they've got the highest profile of all the management consultancies. Their clients include all the top corporations, governments, and they aim to improve their performance. And you have the NHS on their books, UK Health Service, Canadian government, US government, Saudi, and their alumni, just the CEOs and the COOs of all the top organizations, including the Bank of England, Facebook, etc. So they are a very, very influential company. What we started with just 4 people, leafleting them about 6 months ago outside their office one morning. And on the back of that, because they called the police, because they confiscated all of our leaflets, but our action got to their board. And because of that, we decided to go back. And it's been ongoing every fortnight ever since, apart from, of course, recently when we've been looking at going cyber on them. We chose them because they have the highest profile. And the idea was if we could shame them into a drastic reduction of their own carbon footprint, and also to put climate mitigation at the heart of their consultancy, then that would create a ripple effect across the industry, and it would have a change not only with their competitors, but with the clients that they advise. And it's had varying degrees of success and otherwise. But that's basically what's brought me here today.
I wanted to kick off the discussion with just defining a bit about what we're speaking about. It's we're thinking about engaging with employees, decision makers within key institutions, and it's not something maybe we discuss so much in XR, where we're very focused on gluing onto things and being out en masse on the street in a very public way. But I wanted to sort of put the question to you, as an activist, why should I care about engaging with the decision makers within the institutions I'm targeting? Isn't non-violent civil disobedience on the streets enough to reach these goals that we have as XR? And I don't know if Roc, you want to come in first on that, perhaps.
Non-violent direct action is an incredible method, and it's also completely exhilarating and fun. And so it's just wonderful. And it's a necessary condition for success of what XR is trying to do, which is to get the government to enact the 3 demands. But it's not sufficient. In my view, we need other tools as well as non-violent direct action. We're not going to get there without non-violent direct action, but only with non-violent direct action we won't get there either. Non-violent direct action accumulates power, and it opens doors. It opens doors to the people who have their hands on the levers of power. And in my view, we have to go through those doors and explain to the people with their hands on the levers what they've got to do. And if we don't go through those doors, like, people think we don't know what we're doing, and we lose respect and we lose the power to actually create the change that we need to create. And that sort of power and opportunity we've accumulated will evaporate. So I think we have to go through those doors, and we have to engage in dialogue with the people inside.
Do you want to just expand a little bit on the work that you do within XR, Roc?
Around August last year, we thought that we had really good contacts in many areas of society as XR, but one area where we were weak was with the establishment and with the sort of traditional power structures. And we sort of felt that to get the change we need, the huge scale of change we need at the speed we need, we really need to be trying to co-opt, maybe is the wrong word, but get everyone on board if we can. If we can't, we can't, but we have to try. So we started something called XR Catalysers with that aim in view. And we began really sort of networking, cold calling, giving talks, trying different methods, a lot of experimentation. And it's quite hard to measure success in this work because a lot of it's anecdotal. But we have certain anecdotal examples where we have achieved tremendous success. And in terms of the sort of personal changes you see in people after we've interacted with them, it's quite powerful. People do go through quite dramatic transformations.
Rafela, so to that question, why should I bother, kind of as an activist, going beyond this mass public civil disobedience model? Is there anything you can tell us about the work you've done with McKinsey, which is such a big influential firm? Why did you choose that target, and why did you feel that was important above and beyond the regular XR tactics?
Well, I think there has been a change in the XR agenda, that from raising the alarm, which was so important last year, to actually a lot more around engaging and to try and persuade people through discussion and dialogue, and looking at what we need now are partnerships and ways that we can find solutions and positive visions together. And I think that just staying in the role of the protester, it reinforces their role as kind of opposition to that. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at this in a different way. And certainly when you take organizations like McKinsey, they are the decision makers, they have the power, but they also live and they work in a very single dimension place. They do have lots of ideas that come forward, but they're all thinking in the same direction. And one of the things that we're able to do is just by talking to the individuals, from employees all the way up to the partners, we could actually start to initiate discussion and give other ideas around, for example, growth, or God forbid, degrowth. We could start to mention concepts like that. And I think that discussion on their doorstep has been incredibly powerful, because it reaches them at all different layers of the organisation, from their employees right the way up to the partners themselves.
As an activist, how do you actually go about getting into the room?
Strangely, cold calling works. So even if you don't have a sort of contact in an organization, if you want to talk to a particular organization, you can email their sort of out-facing email address and say, could we arrange a meeting with the CEO? And that often works. And even if it doesn't work, it's very helpful, because it sort of focuses minds. The CEO will hear you've requested an interview, even if you don't get one. And that really focuses minds. It's like sort of rattling the cage a bit. But actually, it's surprising how often it works. So another way is giving talks. Often if you give a talk, there will be people in the audience who will come up afterwards and give you their card. And they will either be people of power and influence, or they will know people of power and influence. And they'll say, you need to talk to this person. And often the people they say you need to talk to are people they know are sympathetic. They know there is a problem. They know everything's going to have to change, but they don't quite know what to do about it, because not everyone has gone so far in the sort of long road of thinking, figuring out what has to happen, as perhaps XR. And then that sort of is networking in effect. So networking is really effective, and you find if you contact one person, they will often kind of recruit amongst their peers on your behalf. Sometimes they'll actually spontaneously start creating events for their peers, because people are very curious about XR. It's quite sexy, XR. It is interesting to sort of management types how effective it's been, how quickly, with how few resources. And they're very conscious they can learn from our methods. And that's really interesting to me, because I think built into our methods, like the sort of holacracy and the non-hierarchy and the fact that in our meetings everyone gets a chance to talk, built into that is a sort of benign outcome. So it's very hard to use those methods for bad purposes, is my feeling. So the more we can spread those methods, the more we are implicitly spreading our work. So people want to know about that, and they also recognize that we're right, basically, and that they want to come on board. And sometimes their job doesn't allow them to actually explicitly come on board, but they want to help us from behind the scenes.
Lots of different things you can do there: cold calling, getting people to do talks within their organisation. So Justine, did you want to come in on this one?
I guess my interest in this comes slightly before you get the people in the room, and I guess what I'd want to be talking about is psychology, because in XR there is this principle of no blame, and I feel that this needs to be looked at in a deeper and more nuanced way if we're going to work with people in these positions of power, because the invitation won't work. We won't be able to get anyone in the room if the invitation feels adversarial, and if somebody feels that blame or judgment is in the space. It doesn't matter how well you attempt to disguise that, they will feel it, and they will feel it's an adversarial environment. So I think it's really important to visit the principle of no blame in a deeper way. And I think, you know, it's a tall order for many people to be in the room with people they see as responsible for some of the damage. I mean, if you're working with leaders within an oil company, for example, there's a kind of instinctive distaste for engaging with the people you see responsible for doing the damage. But I feel like actually this principle of no blame really needs to run all the way through us, like the writing in a stick of rock. So how do we do that if we're feeling angry and if we're aware of the urgency and we're thinking about, you know, the lives of our children and we're hurtling towards extinction? Sort of how do you do that? Well, I think, you know, XR has this very strong rootedness in regenerative culture, which tells us that our inner work and reflection are actually a part of the way that we make change, and that we need to be the change that we want to see. So that means creating non-hierarchical spaces where people can experience their interrelatedness with each other, and that everyone's included in that, not just the people that we agree with, obviously. So I think this kind of shift in strategy towards working with power holders is a real opportunity, actually. And I think one of the things that happens when we come into relationship with those people is that it brings up our own issues around power, if you like, and like it highlights what goes on inside us around issues of power and authority. So, for example, just to give a really simple example, if we had an authoritarian father, that might come up and kind of, we might be carrying wounds that would get in the way of us interacting with people who have authority in a clean way. And also we can project onto others what we're not owning or living in ourselves. And, you know, I've got a little example of this myself. In the first rebellion last year, there was an action against the BBC that I felt drawn to get involved with. And I'm aware that actually the BBC, more than oil companies and more than other destructive industries, I used to get so riled up and so ranty about the BBC. And I thought, actually, I have to reflect, I have to understand what this is about, because I could sense that some of my own stuff was involved in my reaction. And when I reflected on it, I could see that actually my judgment on the BBC was that they have this tremendous power to affect change and to actually communicate what humanity needs to hear. But they do it like this much. They could be doing it this much and they do it that much. And actually that was how I felt about myself. I could see that I had more power than I was really utilizing for the goals that I want to achieve. So I guess that's just a little story that demonstrates that when we feel that extra level of anger or irritation inside us, it's a sign that our own stuff is getting involved in that, and our activism will be limited by that. So having a kind of non-adversarial approach and doing the inner work that we need to do that cleanly is really important. And I think it's also working with these places of power is a call for us to really own our own power that we have for change. But going back to the non-adversarial theme, I think I've been very inspired by Sarah Corbett, the craftivist, and like many of you may know this story, but she had this fantastic little example of how non-adversarial activism can really work. And she was working with the board of directors for Marks and Spencer, and they were actually brought in as a team to help with this action, and they were wanting to bring in the living wage for all of the staff at M&S. And what Sarah and her team decided to do was to research the personal lives of all of the board of directors, and to make this action based in craft, where they actually sewed these beautiful handkerchiefs that were in the favourite colour of each board member, and they'd kind of researched their hobbies, and they'd kind of written these beautiful things into it, and they were kind of affirming the directors' highest values, really saying, you know, thank you for what you're doing, and, you know, we know that you really care about your work and that you have integrity. And they kind of they went in person and waited outside and gave these gifts to the board members as they went into the meeting. And it actually really affected change. They were invited back to the next meeting to talk about, they'd included what obviously what their action was about and what they wanted. And they were invited into the board meeting and actually shared the board meeting with them and actually got what they wanted in the end. So I just really loved that story because it was so rooted in compassion and love and meeting people as human beings, and took this very kind of feminine, soft approach, and yet worked. They got the living wage for the people in Marks and Spencer. So I think that's like a great little story.
Certainly, from our point of view, we found getting into a room with the decision makers is very ambitious. We basically went on an approach to win their hearts and minds. We dressed up in city gear to normalise ourselves with the staff at McKinsey, and the idea was that we used a variety of different methods, from humour. We did the full XR style, getting everyone on the street with the samba bands. We had an elephant in the room, which we built a room around it. It was wonderful, but it's all been really, it's always been very, very humorous and very gentle, but trying to engage them. And at the beginning, they wouldn't talk to us at all. And by the end, we have conversations now with a large number of the staff and the partners. Originally, we'd planned to get to a stage where we could have a meeting and bring the Catalysers in at that board level. But it became apparent, after a while, that they weren't going to do that. And that's all right, because I think one of the things that we've worked out is that actually you don't necessarily need to be in a room to have that change. You can make that change on the doorstep. All those small conversations with people that work in it are incredibly powerful, because they're the ones from the inside that can then change a company. They can change a firm from within. And also our conversations with the partners outside has that impact. And also, by building up that relationship outside, we were able to write letters to the CEO. And the letter, I know, would have had more of an impact because she knew the people that it was coming from. And so I think it is important to get in the room. But if you don't, there are loads of other ways of going about it. And just one of the most powerful moments that I saw was when one of our rebels was talking to a partner, and we'd been talking to him for about 15 minutes. He was a petroleum expert within the field, and she just at the end made the analogy between petroleum and the slave trade, and the visible change in his face. It had made a massive impact. So getting in the room is important, but if you don't get in, there are ways that you can just chip away.
We've got Temporal Comet from Instagram says, what explanation will incentivize the powerful to do the right thing by all of us? So that's the first question. Now the second one comes from Jill, who's joining us on Zoom, and she's asking, how do you get a CEO to take seriously concepts like degrowth?
On the incentivization, I think it's various methods, and it kind of comes up depending on who you're talking to and in what context. So either rationally, you can explain to people they're going to lose their money if they build another oil rig, because it's not going to, the oil's not going to be burnt. Or it's emotionally, and that you can bring them out of the denial that a lot of us are in to different extents, into a place where they realize that they love their children and what they're doing is harming their children, if they have children. And it's strange, but you can really do that, and you can really get people to suddenly realize they've boxed themselves into the wrong place and they need to be in another place, and open that sort of thing where they will begin to be figuring out how to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And on the degrowth question, I suppose that's part of the other question in a sense, because it's the right thing. So you're figuring out how to incentivize people to do the right thing. And so then the question is, what is the right thing? XR is not about solutions, partly because it's not sort of elected, and yet it believes in democracy. Partly because its structures aren't built to decide what the solutions should be. XR is really its task has been to get the three demands met by government, but in various ways. And degrowth, however, degrowth, for the demands to happen, degrowth has to happen. Degrowth in the harmful industries, not degrowth in massages or listening to music or making music or writing books or having picnics with your friends, or all sorts of industries which aren't contributing to the problem, which don't have the massive negative externalities of consumerism and driving around and flying and things. So there can be growth in those things, but there has to be degrowth in fossil fuel heavy and environmental damage heavy industries.
Just to build on what Roc said, if they don't see that emotional attachment to change, one of the things that we were recommended by a member of staff at McKinsey is a couple of members of staff said, you've got to go for their reputational risk. And the reputational risk of all these companies is huge, and that's something that they're all considering. And on the degrowth, I have to say that a couple of weeks ago, I was completely shaken by an article that came from McKinsey, which was addressing climate change in the post-pandemic world. And it presents climate breakdown as a real and imminent threat and danger. And it urges the governments and companies to put the transition to a zero carbon economy in the heart of policy and prioritize what it calls economic and environmental resilience over short-term profit. I mean, that is the arch capitalists suggesting that we shouldn't be considering profit, and to have a step like that is it's extraordinary. Now the difficulty is, how do we hold them to it?
Justine, did you want to come in on that question?
Yeah, I could just share one element of what we're doing. I mean, St Ethelburga's is working through leadership programs and has developed a leadership program in deep adaptation for the city. And what deep adaptation is for us is it is looking at the kinds of things that are going to be coming our way if we continue on the path that we're on. And we've developed embodied exercises that are essentially about enabling people to really internalize the very real possibility of human extinction, because it's, people can have the facts, but they can't let it in. So we've developed techniques that are about building community and then walking together through this landscape of the future that's coming our way, and really like looking into that abyss. And then, we're using different mentors from different backgrounds who can present the rationale that demonstrates that we cannot solve this with the current economic model. So right at the bottom of the abyss, when you're looking at the potential for human extinction, you're also coming into awareness that it cannot be solved with the current economic model. And then we're kind of leading people out the other side, but not prescribing what they do, just asking questions such as, how could your industry be reconfigured in a way that will serve both people and planet? So we didn't actually get to do this leadership course because of coronavirus, but this is the plan that we've developed, and we'll be working with the younger generation and working specifically in very small finance institutions and insurance, because there's more capacity for them to change when they go back. So we would say you can't just kind of convince someone overnight. People need holding within that process in order to internalize something that actually one needs a lot of psychological and spiritual strength to actually face. So yeah, kind of more holding and community to get there.
Maybe slightly more thorny question now. Who's this come from? Indigo on Zoom. So Indigo says, this sounds positive, this all sounds positive, but also sounds reformist. Surely it is XR's place to advocate civil disobedience against the financial sector in order to make real, tangible change. So I'm just going to throw that out to the three of you.
We definitely need to be outside these buildings protesting. And I think there's a model that I really like, which is that we figure out the sort of essential links in the chain of the damage, and we put them into lockdown. And XR put the BBC into lockdown. I can't remember when it was, very effectively. And what really interests me is the BBC didn't report it, as far as I know, but we put them into lockdown, and it really focused their minds. So I agree entirely with Indigo. We have to be outside, and we have to be making them realize that it's not on how they're behaving. But I think we also have to be inside. So I think we have to, when you're legal observer with XR, there's a rule that you're never legal observer on the same day that you are locked under a truck or something. So you're either an activist or you're a legal observer in any 24-hour period from midnight to midnight. And I think probably the same goes with being inside or outside one of these institutions. I don't think you can be outside and inside on the same day necessarily, although Rafela might sort of challenge me on that. But I think it's important that we're both inside and outside, and that they have no place to hide, in effect. And to give you an example, we went to Davos. About 7 XR people went to Davos. Lots of XR people went to Davos to protest, which was fantastic, and we joined them, and there were some really good protests. But we also went to be inside the rooms with people and challenging people inside. And when people realize that nowhere's safe and they're they don't have any havens, that's perhaps when, and their back's against the wall, perhaps that's when they really will realize change has to come, and fast.
It's just such an interesting question, and I think there's got to be room. There's got to be room for all, really. And one of the things is that with our action, we would never have got the profile within the company if it hadn't been for having the XR name behind us. Disadvantage of what we've done is that we haven't had any meaningful dialogue. You know, we've never gone into the building. We haven't met members of staff, but it's always been outside. But then on the other hand, by being there and by being civil, by taking a different approach to the movement, we've actually, I think we've changed quite a lot of their attitude towards the climate and ecological emergency, and they're the ones that have the capacity to change from within.
St Ethelburga's is distinct from XR. I mean, we're supporting what you do, but also distinct from you. So, and I think that we need lots of different kinds of approaches. And St Ethelburga's is a centre for peace and reconciliation. So one of the means that we want to work is through restorative justice and through listening circles. So bringing together, a little bit similar to what Roc's doing in Catalysers, but working through bringing very diverse voices together and using restorative justice models to have conversations. So rather than actually seeking to persuade, we're actually creating space for listening and a model that will enable people to be to experience being very connected with each other in a non-hierarchical space, and then to hear many different reflections on people from within the current economic model, regenerative kind of new economists, people who are really impacted by the on the receiving end of the damage of some of the things that are going on at the moment, and refugees, for example, and activists as well, but bringing in a whole range of different voices and not seeking to persuade, but just putting all the voices in the room together and letting everybody influence everyone else and kind of creating this open space. So I mean, that's one of the ways in which St Ethelburga's works with senior decision makers. So I think we need lots of different ways of going about this.
Gosh, I've got loads of really good questions here. It's hard for me to pick which one. Wouldn't shareholder financial leverage be the only language that boardrooms listen to?
I think another language boardrooms listen to is their pay packet and their bonuses, which is why I think a particular good area of leverage is on their remuneration committees, who decide how much they're going to get. And those are supposed to be arm's length. They're supposed to be not the directors of a company deciding how much they get, but a sort of arm's length committee. But just to give the example of Barclays, I think, I might be wrong, I think there's about 4 people on the committee. And I think one of them works for one of the big independent oil companies. So one of the big independent oil companies has someone in the committee at Barclays who is deciding how much the people running Barclays are going to be paid. And to me, that's A, an example of a massive conflict of interest, and B, a potential area of massive leverage. So I think shareholders are an area of leverage, a very important one, because often the shareholders actually are us, with our pensions and our insurance policies and our savings if we have them and so on. But and also, yeah, and the institutions we work for and etc. all have money in the stock market. But there are many other areas to put leverage as well.
Their children have had a massive impact, certainly. And then when they go home and say to their parents, what have you done about it? I think that's been huge. But otherwise, no, it's just coming back to the whole concept of a reputational risk. Can they afford not to do something? And I think that is something that is really rippling across the city. But otherwise, no, I think we should be going at this from all different angles. Shareholders are a massive influence and we should be tackling them.
I guess one of the things that we see as a route into the conversation is actually the work of McKinsey on diversity and collective intelligence, because McKinsey's report about how taking diverse perspectives on things actually enables your organisation to harness more collective intelligence and give you the competitive edge. You know, that is an important message for us in the model that I was just talking about, where we're bringing together these diverse voices. And obviously we're seeking to influence the decision makers in the finance institutions by putting them together with these voices, but by saying to them that, well, McKinsey have demonstrated that actually, you know, you'll be at a competitive advantage yourself if you go outside your echo chamber, if you listen to people that are coming from very, very different places. So that's one of our routes into that conversation.
So this one comes from Alex, who's joining us on Zoom. Now, Alex says, I work at Lloyd's, which is a hierarchical organisation that has a power structure not dissimilar to McKinsey. Most conversations internally are on reducing the organisation's carbon footprint. How do you create activism from within? I've been talking to the Stop Adani campaign over the last few months, and one of the tactics they actually used was to, as Roc was saying before, kind of cold call their employees. So I think between 2014 and 17, they did a big campaign against the 4 major banks in Australia. And they got they managed to find the LinkedIn details for all of the employees for these banks and just send out kind of mass emails to all of them. And didn't get many responses. But a few people here and there responded and were super keen about even just giving bits of intel, helping the campaigners, the Stop Adani campaigners out with their campaign, which was ultimately successful over the next 3 years in getting these banks to stop funding the Adani coal mine. So yeah, just that one big effort at cold calling at the beginning of the campaign really paid dividends going on by getting employees who were very willing to pass on information and say what the campaign was feeling like within the organisation. What are the conversations that are now being had, after on the streets actions? Stop Adani did a lot of actions against local bank branches, similar to what you saw Greenpeace do earlier this year with Barclays, where they shut down 100 different branches around the country. But they wouldn't have sort of known where to go with their campaign over the years if they hadn't had that feedback from the employees inside. So it can be a more kind of subtle relationship rather than necessarily getting them out on the streets with you. They can provide a lot of help in other ways.
With McKinsey, one of the things, the timing for us going in, it happened to be just after they'd set up this green team within their organisation, and they were certainly a couple said your timing could not have been better. But they what the employees felt was that by us being there, we gave them a voice, and a voice that was listened to within the organisation. Certainly, the staff are now aware that one of their 4 main priorities is the dissatisfaction of their staff, and largely around the climate and ecological emergency. So there are ways you can get in, but what they said is that they said that us being outside had a massive impact. But they also said that it's just gradually building up systems within that's really important. And the green teams are a really good starting point.
This was a piece of learning that I took from Charles Burrell, who's the founder of the Knepp Estate, which is the largest rewilding project in Europe, which is in Sussex. And he's a very influential person who spends his whole life talking to decision makers and very senior people about the need for rewilding. And he said that, you know, no matter how open someone's heart is, or how persuaded somebody is, it's very hard for people to make big decisions within their industry without a community of supportive peers. So what he found was that actually by networking decision makers who were open to change together, or who were asking those questions, by putting them together into network communities, they felt less vulnerable, and they were more able to go out on a limb and make radical decisions and to be persuasive within their own industry. And I thought that was a really valuable piece of learning.
I just wanted to very quickly end with 3 kind of quick fire questions for you guys. So the first one is, I'll say it and then we can go round. So what are the biggest obstacles that you found? What's the one biggest obstacle you found when engaging with key decision makers?
I would say the psychology of denial, and it's very mysterious and extremely powerful. It's so powerful that one is in denial about it, basically. But that's the biggest obstacle.
I would have to say I completely agree with Roc on that one.
I agree, and their inaccessibility, but yeah, with Roc on that.
Second quick fire question. So what is the one piece of advice you would give to activists out there looking to engage on a personal level with key decision makers?
I think my piece of advice would be to experiment, because there is a way to make a difference, and just keep trying different ways, and there is a way.
Do your inner work, don't dehumanize anyone, and remember that an enemy is somebody whose story you haven't heard.
Seize the moment. I think we've got an amazing opportunity to rethink and redirect the way that organizations work.
Very last question of the day. What is the one thing that you would say to any key decision makers watching right now?
Every decision has to be evaluated against the criterion, is it good for the next generation or not? And if it's not good for the next generation and succeeding generations, then it's not a good decision, and it can't be used.
I would say we need you. We need your expertise. We need your innovation.
Can you afford not to do something?
I'd just like to thank my panelists, and thank you to our audience. And yeah, I think that's all the time we've got. Thanks very much, guys.